All right. Break's over.
BioWare has had a rough past 10 years. Like, I'm talking really rough. Especially if you ask the fans, because between failed projects like Anthem, a game that I actually really enjoyed playing, and the mishandling of the Mass Effect follow-up with Andromeda, it was starting to feel like the BioWare we know and love no longer existed. Having covered and watched their struggles over the years, I came into Dragon Age the Veilguard cautiously optimistic. I kept thinking, can they really recapture what makes BioWare RPGs feel so inherently unique? After some initial pacing issues at the beginning of the story, I slowly felt more and more at home in this deeply connected and very clearly more focused Dragon Age world. So I'm happy to report that BioWare did it. They've delivered a fresh take on the beloved franchise, whose scope and personality are greater than the whole of its flaws. As I assembled my Avengers of Thedas, a team full of complex, interesting, and nuanced characters, I couldn't help but feel that same old BioWare magic starting to come back. Veilguard isn't just a return to Thedas, it's a ushering in of sorts, a sort of coming of Dragon Age, if you will, for a new era of Dragon Age games. From the opening act of the game, you can feel that the DNA of Dragon Age is there, just altered a little bit, largely in part due to the Veilguard wearing its influences on its shoulders like a proud badge of honor. The devs have commented on the impact games like God of War 2018 and Final Fantasy VII Remake have had on their views of not just game design, but on RPGs as a whole. Initially, I was really worried that taking those specific sources and applying them here would make the game feel less like Dragon Age or less like an RPG altogether. But there was clearly a passionate interest in maintaining a good balance of old and new, perhaps no better illustrated by the scope of Veilguard's story and world. Taking place across the vastness of Northern Thedas, longtime Dragon Age fans will finally get to visit, and more importantly explore, places we've only had the chance to read about previously. Instead of going for the often bloated and needlessly large open world format, BioWare opted to show restraint and make each area a contained zone. These areas are more precisely laid out, harkening back to my days exploring the worlds of Star Wars Knights of the Old Republic, another BioWare RPG. Deliberately designed areas of woven lanes with plenty of offshoots worth exploring create recursive levels that lend themselves to multiple exploration trips just to see everything. I found myself drawn back to areas that I had already been to find new paths and loot, taking in the breathtaking visuals as I toured places like Travanos and took a moonlit walk with some skeletons in Necropolis. BioWare has always been a beacon of creativity and flow when it comes to world design, and Veilguard is no different. Gorgeous flame-lit cobblestone streets and fantastically vibrant wild areas are found all throughout Thedas. Dragon Age has never been more on point when it comes to environments. I especially love the way the dynamic lighting helped paint a moodier atmosphere across its world. I mean, there's a little bit too much purple in it, but aside from that, I think the color palette is really good. You honestly can't take more than a couple of steps without being floored by some awe-striking beauty, whether it be the gothic Spanish-inspired city of Travano or the mind-bending, gravity-defying ruins of Arlathan Forest. Every inch of the game's world is full of character. Speaking of character, the details of this fantasy escape are a shining star in a darkening world. Character designs are impeccable, telling their own stories within the way that the person is dressed, the subtle details of their tattoos or scars. Fabulously crafted armor and outfits make for a fashion style unique to the world of Dragon Age. Dragon Age has always had good armor, but I think these are some of the more intricately designed factions we've seen. After watching so many game studios head for photorealism, I'm happy to see BioWare stick to a more stylized approach. It's still realistic-ish, but it feels specific to this world. I just wish that style included facial animations that looked a little more, modern, I guess. In fact, sometimes the facial animations were a little jarring, briefly pulling me back in time to 2011, with stiff-looking NPCs delivering incredible voice acting with their faces showing all the emotional nuance of a bag of frozen peas. Now, that being said, the voice acting is incredible from start to finish. I never got tired or annoyed with the interpersonal chats my team would get into. Their spats were mostly fun and also informative to their personalities. Most impressively, Dragon Age the Veilguard features the single greatest hair simulation I have ever seen in any video game ever. I mean, it moves and responds so realistically and doesn't look like polygonal strands, but instead it has volume and definition, giving it the weighty feeling that hair should have when in motion. It's quite possibly the greatest technical feat in this game. The combat here is a direct evolution and refinement of what came before in Inquisition and Dragon Age 2. Long gone are the days of tactical turn-based gameplay, because short of JRPGs and the rare Baldur's Gate, pretty much every action RPG game has taken the approach of over-the-shoulder real-time battles, and I think we all have God of War to thank for that. On the one hand, this makes crossing blades way more dynamic, allowing for more improvisation and giving more player freedom when it comes to builds. On the other dagger-clenched fist, BioWare perhaps leaned a little too much into their inspirations, because while combat is excellent at times and gets progressively more cohesive and satisfying, its use of similar systems in fights means I can do a direct comparison to other games, which I hate to do. For instance, the basic melee combos are the usual light and heavy moves, simplistic chains of mashing a sequence of lights or heavies, ending with a flourish. God of War also had a very simplistic rhythm, the difference being variety. Veilguard lacks options to infuse into combos, meaning that when you don't have an ability up ready for use, you are just kinda doing the same exact parry, dodge, and combo attack situation until you can throw some exploding daggers at a bone man. Somewhat ironically, Rook is much like his counterpart in chess, lacking movement variety, which is really disappointing, because I had hoped that the reason that they moved to this pure action-adventure combat style had come because of a really unique battle system, something that made it stand out from its competitors. Companions do help with this flow though a little. They allow you to apply a primer, like Overwhelming, followed by calling on a friend to detonate that with a corresponding skill. On paper this idea sounds so cool, but sadly in execution it's limited and uninspired. Which, I have to say, BioWare, this was not the year to drop the ball on that. I hate to do it to you, but compared to games like Final Fantasy VII Rebirth and Dragon's Dogma 2, Veilguard's companions, at least in terms of fighting, feel undercooked. Not only do they have no risk associated with them because they don't even have health bars, they can't be knocked out, and they really can't actually help revive Rook unless you have a special item equipped, but on top of all of that, it almost doesn't even matter who you bring on a mission together. You'd think with a team combo attack system in place that BioWare would have gone all in on unique skill interactions. Okay, so bear with me here. Let's say I have the Ice Mage Nev and the Phoenix befriending Warden Davrin on my team. We hop into battle and Nev throws a blizzard at a foe, encasing them in ice and priming them for Davrin to strike his fire-engulfed Phoenix into them, causing a detonation. Now, the resulting combo could have been something cool, like triggering shrapnel damage from flying shards of ice, or creating a cloud of steam to conceal your next attack, but no. Now, the reality of this mechanic is a yellow circle of magic, time dilation kind of, and a generic explosion that gets pretty boring to look at after about 3 times. Look, I don't think I'm being too extra here when I say I just wish my necromancer friend and my demon possessed friend could team up in some cool unseen way with their unique skill sets. I think my real issue here is that the game's combat is starting to feel more in line with Mass Effect than its own predecessors. Maybe it's unfair to pin the expectations of my mind on the devs because the combat here is serviceable and inoffensive. I just had hoped that teammates would be more than mere extensions of the player. All those gripes aside, several of the boss fights throughout the game offered genuine challenges and required me to play very intentionally to be able to beat them. At one point, I even had to fight 2 dragons at once, which is easily in my top 10 boss fights for the year.
Oh, sister.
In a way, the real BioWare RPG is the friends we made along the way. The very core of every BioWare game are its characters, story, and world, all of which are front and center in Dragon Age to the Veilguard. Our story follows the newly formed Veilguard group as they seek to stop the risen, blighted, so-called elven gods, Gillenane and Elgernon, from engulfing the world in blight and subjugating its people. These 2 eldritch horror-looking assholes show up to bring havoc and impossible odds to the world, threatening any and every part of Thedas that they can. The first 2 or 3 hours of this game are spent simply repeating these facts to various parties ad nauseum.
For the worse, unfortunately. Our gods, Elgernon and Gillenane, they've escaped from Fen'Harel's prison, and by all accounts, they want to destroy the world.
Which kind of kills the pace, but after that, when you find out, I don't want to spoil anything here, but BioWare definitely cooked something special up with this narrative. Following the story's twist is like getting duped by David Blaine on the street in front of your dad, feeling very embarrassed as he distracts you by making a quarter disappear, all while using his swift, deceptive moves, allowing him to trick you into losing your watch. Then he asks you to pick which one of your friends should die for your ignorance. Veilguard's narrative is very similar. It's as deceptive a storyteller as the Dreadwolf himself. How the story goes is determined by important choices that truly impact the world around you, and let me tell you, messing up one of these crucial decisions can have gut-wrenching impacts. Impacts that extend not only to the main quest, but to all the faction and more direly, the companion quests. At first I was kind of bummed out by how these choices seemed less dire than previous entries, but after making a few of them, I saw these forks in the road for what they truly are. Deeply ingrained and intimate consequences for my actions. This meant the effects on my friends were far more personal, which carried a somehow heavier weight than the literal end of the planet. The reason these decisions hit me harder was because of how truly likable my companions all are. Each of the 7 members of the Veilguard has their own trajectory, a story arc all their own. Rook can strike up important conversations, go on outings, and special companion-specific quests. I certainly wouldn't want to spoil anything here, and I want to leave you to explore these characters and discover their personal stories yourself, so I'm not going to go into detail. Suffice to say, the team is made of deeply enjoyable and complex characters who are directly impacted by your choices in the larger world, which means when you complete all their designated quests and earn that Hero of the Veilguard status, you'll be confronted with some truly dread-inducing choices. Over the course of my playthrough, I came to love just about every character in my band of heroes. Emmerich is deeply sympathetic as a character, and he speaks with all the eloquence that you'd expect out of someone dressed like he is. Nev is a stoic but indispensably passionate mage who isn't afraid to offer up a little sass. The only drawback with any of these characters I had was that the characters were maybe a little too agreeable. Don't get me wrong, there is spats and conflicts, but the vast majority of the group take a liking to each other fairly quickly. All of them are well acted, fun characters with nuanced emotions, just maybe a little too safe on the interaction front at times.
Wonderful! I'll gather my things. Come, Manfred.
Dragon Age: The Veilguard is a triumphant return for BioWare. With solid gameplay roots, excellent level design, memorable characters, and compelling personal stories set against an existential threat, Veilguard more than earns a spot amongst the best RPGs of the year. And while I did enjoy my time with its admittedly underwhelming combat, the thing that will pull me back in for a second and even third playthrough are the incredible characters throughout the game. I want to see the consequences of my choices from every possible angle, a narrative trick that few other studios have pulled off quite as well. Dragon Age: The Veilguard is as amazing a sequel to the Legacy RPG series as I could have ever imagined, and easily earns its 9 from me. Here's hoping BioWare can start a new streak of excellent titles going forward. I'm looking at you, Mass Effect. For Hardwired, I'm Andrew Hamilton.